What kind of power does a man have to hold over people that women would kill for him, die for him, or risk everything to set him free? Today we are peeling back the layers of the so-called Manson Girls, the shocking things they did, how deep their loyalty went, and what happened to them after the world turned against their leader. And I'm your host, Alina. Let's get into it. Charles Manson may have died in 2017, but the dark spell he cast is still very much alive, especially through the women who followed him. Some became killers. Some staged armed attacks. Others managed to walk away unscathed. But why did they follow him? And what don't we know about them? Let's talk about Patricia Krenwinkel, the quiet church girl who took a very sharp left turn, armed with a knife and a messiah complex. Nicknamed Katie by Manson, because why not strip everyone of their identity? Patricia was involved in both nights of the Manson family's infamous murder spree in August 1969. What are now known as the Tate murders and the LaBianca murders. And not just involved, she was the most violent out of all the women. That infamous image you've probably seen in documentaries or reenactments. The woman sprinting across Sharon Tate's lawn with a knife raised high over her head. Yes, that was her. These weren't just random killings. They were brutal, calculated, and meant to spark what Charles Manson called helter-skelter, his apocalyptic race war fantasy. Yes, it was as unhinged as it sounds. So what exactly happened? Night 1, August 8, 1969. Patricia was one of 4 people Manson sent to a house in Benedict Canyon, a luxurious home being rented by actress Sharon Tate, who was 8.5 months pregnant. Patricia, along with Susan Atkins, Tex Watson, and Linda Kasabian, who stood outside and didn't participate, broke in and killed 5 people. Sharon Tate, 26-year-old and heavily pregnant, Jay Sebring, a celebrity hairstylist and Tate's close friend, Abigail Folger, heiress to the Folger coffee fortune, Wojciech Frykowski, Folger's boyfriend, and Stephen Parent, a young man who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was leaving the guest house when they arrived and was shot in his car. Patricia chased Abigail Folger through the house and out into the yard. Folger was already stabbed by the time she fled, but Patricia caught up with her, tackled her on the lawn, and stabbed her 28 times. It was savage and frenzied. Tex Watson later admitted that Abigail was still alive and bleeding while Patricia kept stabbing her. Night 2, August 9, 1969. The following night, Manson sent Patricia out again, this time to the Los Feliz home of Lino and Rosemary LaBianca, a wealthy couple who didn't know the Manson family at all. This time, Manson himself went alone at the start to settle the energy, but he didn't participate in the actual killings. Once inside, Patricia, alongside Tex Watson and Leslie Van Houten, tied up the couple. Lena was stabbed multiple times with a bayonet. Patricia then carved the word war into his stomach. Yes, with a knife. They also stabbed Rosemary LaBianca dozens of times. Patricia later admitted to using a fork to leave more wounds in Lena's abdomen, and even left it stuck in his stomach, like some kind of message. And then, as if the horror wasn't enough, they wrote phrases on the walls in a victim's blood. Things like death to pigs and helter-skelter. Yes, misspelled. To frame the Black Panthers and kick off the race war Manson believed was coming. So yeah, Patricia Krenwinkel wasn't just part of the Manson family's murders. She was hands-on, deeply involved, and horrifyingly loyal. At trial, she was part of the same unsettling spectacle, giggling, singing, smiling, while the prosecution laid out the horrifying details of what actually happened. It was surreal, and when Manson told his followers to prove their loyalty, she didn't hesitate. She shaved her head and carved an X into her forehead, publicly removing herself from society, as Charlie called it. But here's where it gets complicated. located. Back at Spahn Ranch, Patricia wasn't the bloodthirsty cultist that people saw on TV. She was the caregiver, the one who looked after the kids. Other family members described her as motherly, gentle, comforting, the person who quietly consoled people after Manson's rages. She wasn't the loudest voice in the room. She wasn't even the scariest, just quietly devoted, which, in this case, may have been even more dangerous. Before all this, her life looked like it was heading somewhere very different. After her parents divorced, she went through a religious phase, like seriously religious. She wanted to become a nun. She even attended a Jesuit college in Alabama, of all places, trying to find her footing. But after just one semester, she dropped out and returned to California to live with her stepsister. That's when she met Manson. And just like that, the nun dream was swapped for free love, acid trips, and eventual murder. In a twisted way, maybe it didn't feel like such a drastic change to her. She believed Manson was a messiah after all. Maybe she thought she was still following a holy man, just with fewer Bibles and more body counts. Patricia has been behind bars ever since. As of now, she is the longest serving female inmate in California. She's had multiple parole hearings, most recently in 2022, and each time the same debate comes up. Is she still dangerous, or just a relic of one of the most disturbing moments in American history? Either way, her story is a haunting reminder that sometimes the scariest people aren't the ones who shout. They're the ones who whisper, follow orders, and don't flinch. Leslie Van Houten was the tragic homecoming princess of the Manson family, better known as Lulu. Sounds cute, right? Spoiler, it's not. Leslie was one of the women involved in the infamous Tate LaBianca murders, and her fresh-faced mug, smiling, pigtails bouncing, was splashed across every TV screen and newspaper in America. It was jarring. This wasn't some hardened criminal. This was a former homecoming princess, posing in yearbook photos with perfect posture, satin gloves, and a tiara. And now she was sitting in a courtroom, singing with the other Manson girls like it was summer camp, with death row on the table. Naturally, everyone was asking, how does someone go from prom queen to cult killer? Well, buckle up. Leslie's early life looked fine from the outside. Southern California suburbia, middle-class family, the whole deal. But behind the white picket fence, things were unraveling fast. By 15, Leslie was experimenting with marijuana and dropping acid like it was vitamin C. She was drawn to the hippie movement. Peace, love, rebellion, and all that. But there was more to it than just youthful curiosity. At 17, she told her mother she was pregnant. Now, you'd hope for a sit down, some support, maybe a plan. What she got instead was an order. You're getting an abortion. No discussion, no agency. And here's where it gets real dark, real fast. Leslie was too far along for a standard chemical abortion, so the procedure had to be done manually, and it didn't happen in a clinic. It happened at home. And if that weren't traumatizing enough, her mother then made her bury the fetus in the backyard. Just imagine being a teenager, digging a grave for your own child, with your mother watching from the window. That'll do something to a person's psyche. So when Leslie later met the Manson family, this ragtag group of broken people who preached total freedom, unconditional love, and rejecting society, she latched on it like it was oxygen. They gave her what she hadn't felt in years: validation, attention, belonging. At first, it probably felt like some twisted utopia. No rules, no parents, no judgment. Just dance around the desert, drop acid, and call Charles Manson your savior. Of course, we all know how that ended. Leslie would go on to help kill Lena and Rosemary LaBianca, stabbing Rosemary 16 times after she was already dead. Not exactly the peace and love energy she signed up for. But by that point, the line between loyalty and delusion had completely dissolved. Now, none of this justifies what she did, let's be clear. But it does paint the picture of how someone with a tiara and a yearbook photo ended up wielding a knife for a cult leader. And that's the haunting part about Leslie Van Houten. She didn't look like a killer. She looked like the girl next door. But behind the smile was a spiral of trauma, isolation, and manipulation that led her straight into one of the darkest chapters in American history. Not every Manson girl made headlines. Some stayed in the background, smiling in grainy courthouse footage, singing Charlie's songs like groupies on tour. But make no mistake, their loyalty ran just as deep. Case in point, Catherine Gillies, better known as Cappy. She may not have ended up in a courtroom like Leslie Van Houten or Susan Atkins, but it wasn't for lack of trying. Cappy was all in. She met the family at Spahn Ranch, and from the jump, she was hooked. Not only did she live with them, she upped the ante, offering up her grandmother's property, Myers Ranch, as a second hideout for the family when things started heating up in Los Angeles. And if that little red flag isn't flapping hard enough, here's one that might. Manson, ever the visionary psychopath, asked Gillies to kill her own grandmother to secure the ranch. And guess what? She said yes. She got in a truck with 2 other family members, ready to do the deed. Only problem? The truck got a flat tire on the way. And just like that, Grandma Barbara Myers lived to see another day, thanks to poor tire maintenance. It's one of the only times in history where a flat tire was a literal lifesaver. But Cappy's enthusiasm for murder didn't end with failed family assassination attempts. On both nights of the Tate LaBianca killings, she volunteered to go. She wanted to be chosen. She knew what was going to happen and she was ready, eager even to help kickstart the so-called helter-skelter revolution that Manson had preached like a deranged prophet. The only reason she didn't end up with a knife in her hand was sheer logistics. She just didn't make the cut. After the arrests, while the other girls were behind bars, Cappy stayed busy. She camped outside the courthouse, strumming guitars, singing Charlie's songs, smiling for news crews, and claiming the murders were just a copycat plot to free a family member from jail. She wasn't just a bystander. She was actively promoting and defending the man behind one of the most famous murder sprees in American history. She kept writing to Manson too. Love letters, words of devotion, all the way up until his death in 2017. That's a long commitment for a man who once told her to go kill her own grandmother. Catherine Gillies died in Oregon in 2018, far from the desert, far from Spahn Ranch, and far from the headlines. But the truth is, she came dangerously close to being one of those headlines herself. A flat tire might have been the only thing separating her from life as a footnote and a life behind bars. Before there were headlines, before there were helter-skelter prophecies, or blood on the walls, there was Mary Brunner, the original Manson girl. She was the first woman Charles Manson pulled into his orbit with a guitar and a god complex. Mary was a 23-year-old college-educated librarian from Wisconsin, smart, quiet, kind of bookish, and yet somehow she became the blueprint for his future harem. She also gave birth to the very first Manson family baby, Valentine Michael, nicknamed Pooh Bear, because of course he was. Manson was the father, naturally. There's nothing like kicking off a doomsday cult with a newborn in your arms. Mary wasn't just the first follower, she was also present at the group's first known murder, the killing of Gary Hinman in July 1969. Now this was before the infamous bloodbaths, but still a green preview of what was coming. And if we are counting sketchy near deaths, there was also that bizarre incident involving a loaded gun and the very unlucky game of Russian roulette. But I digress. Gary Hinman was a 34-year-old music teacher and part-time PhD student. He was soft-spoken, thoughtful, and generous. Exactly the kind of guy who let down on their luck kids crashed at his place from time to time. That included members of the Manson family. He knew Bobby Beausoleil, Susan Atkins, and Mary Brunner personally. At one point, all 3 stayed at his house. He wasn't rich, but to the family he looked like he had money. And Manson, who was quickly spiraling into his apocalyptic delusions, had convinced himself he needed cash, fast, for his big race war fantasy, aka Helter Skelter. The excuse to target Hinman came from a bad drug deal. Bobby Beausoleil had allegedly sold some mescaline, a hallucinogen, to a group of bikers, the Straight Satan, who then claimed it was bunk and wanted their money back. Bobby told them the drugs came from Hinman. Manson decided Hinman needed to be persuaded to pay up, so Bobby, Susan Atkins, and Mary Brunner showed up at Hinman's house on July 25, 25, 1969, under the pretense of hanging out. That quickly turned into a hostage situation. For 2 days, they held him captive, trying to extort money. Hinman kept insisting he didn't have any. Eventually, Manson himself dropped by, and let's just say he did not come to de-escalate. In fact, he sliced Hinman across the face with a sword. Yes, an actual sword, leaving a deep wound from ear to chin. Then he left and Bobby was given the task of handling it. After days of torture, Bobby stabbed Hinman to death. Not once, not twice, but multiple times in the chest. They wiped the blood on the walls and scrawled "Political Piggy" above his body, along with the paw print, drawn to look like it came from the Black Panthers. Why? To make it look like a politically motivated killing, part of Manson's plan to incite a race war. This was helter-skelter in action. It was all meant to frame black radicals for the crime and push society toward collapse. Before leaving, Bobby stole Hinman's car. Bad idea. He was arrested just days later when police spotted the stolen vehicle and found him sleeping in it, with the murder weapon still in a trunk. So, not exactly a master criminal. The murder marked a turning point for the family. It was the moment Manson realized if he wanted the apocalypse to come faster, he'd need more violence, more spectacle, more chaos. 2 weeks later, the Tate murders happened. As for Mary Brunner, she was there during the torture and helped clean up after the murder. She was later arrested in connection to a different crime, the attempted armed robbery of a gun store, but was tied back to Hinman through Bobby and the investigation. Here's where it gets interesting. Mary Brunner was actually offered immunity if she testified against her brother, Bobby Beausoleil, the one who actually stabbed Hinman to death. And she did. She got up in court and testified against him, which, if you know anything about cult loyalty, is basically a cardinal sin. Even more surprising, the rest of the family took her back anyway. Yes, the same group that sent threatening letters to other members even thinking about snitching. Mary testified and still returned to the fold like nothing happened. Now, she did kind of sabotage her own testimony by dramatically screaming Bobby's innocent while exiting the courtroom, which torpedoed her immunity deal. Bobby was convicted anyway, and Mary, she was right back outside the courthouse, shaved head, X carved into her forehead, singing Manson songs like it was Sunday worship. Then there's Kitty Lutzinger, Bobby's pregnant girlfriend at the time of the Hinman murder. Kitty didn't testify in court, but she may have been the accidental domino that took down the whole house of cards. After running away from Spahn Ranch with another girl, Kitty told police that Susan Atkins had bragged about killing Hinman. That tip, along with a few other juicy details, put Atkins in a cell where she just couldn't resist running her mouth about everything, including the Tate murders. Incredibly, Kitty also wandered back to the family after basically triggering the downfall of the entire group, and no one seemed to care. She sat on the sidewalk with the other girls, head shaved, chanting Manson's name, like she hadn't just told police enough to get half of them arrested. Somehow, both Mary and Kitty pulled off this vanishing act, flipping on the family just enough to change the game, then slipping right back in like it never happened. If Manson had a list of loyal followers, these two were both on it, and off it, and back on again. Cult life apparently comes with very flexible terms and conditions. And if the Manson family had a list of least favorite members, Barbara Hoyt would have been near the top. Charlie didn't like her much. He told her to her face she needed to lose weight if she wanted to be one of his girls. Real charmer, that guy. Barbara wasn't one of the core players in the murders, but she had been around long enough to know way too much. And when the arrests came down and the truth started bubbling up, who killed who and how, Barbara noped out fast. She didn't wait for some cosmic sign. She packed up her sanity and split. The prosecution was thrilled. Finally, someone from inside the family who wasn't totally brainwashed. They asked her to testify. She hesitated hard, not because she didn't want justice, but because some of the family were still out roaming free, and they had a history of doing Manson's dirty work with terrifying enthusiasm. Enter Ruth Ann Morehouse, friendly face, fellow ex-hippie, manipulative little schemer. To lure Barbara back into the fold, or at least stop her from testifying, Ruth Ann pulled what might be the pettiest and most poorly executed assassination attempt in cult history. She offered Barbara an all-expense-paid trip to Hawaii. Sounds nice, right? Sunshine, beaches, maybe a drink with an umbrella in it. Barbara said yes. For a few days it was bliss. Then came the airport goodbye. Ruth Ann handed Barbara a cheeseburger because nothing says safe travels like fast food at a terminal, and joked, "Imagine if that had 10 hits of acid in it." Cue awkward laugh. But here's the thing, it did. The burger was laced with actual LSD, enough to completely scramble someone's brain if they weren't expecting it, which she wasn't. Barbara spiraled, ended up in traffic, literally on foot in the middle of the road, hallucinating while authorities tried to figure out what the hell was going on. Here's the twist. It didn't scare her into silence. It did the opposite. Once the drugs wore off and she realized she'd almost been chemically gaslit into disappearing, she got mad. Then she got determined. Barbara testified, and her words helped convict key members of the family, not just for the more infamous killing, but for the murder of Donald Shorty Shear, a family associate they gruesomely eliminated once he outlived his usefulness. So yeah, the Hawaii plan backfired spectacularly. Turns out, if you are going to drug someone into silence, maybe don't let them to live to talk about it. Now picture this, it's the summer love of 1967. While most 15-year-olds are busy choosing locker decor, Ruth Ann Morehouse is piling into a busted-up school bus with one Charles Manson and his merry band of French philosophers. 3 short years later, she's spiking a Honolulu hamburger with enough LSD to make Timothy Leary call for a timeout. Her DIY solution for getting a fellow family member turned witness, Barbara Hoyt, to forget everything she'd heard about the Tate Bianca Carnage. And as we know, it didn't work. Hoyt survived, though she claimed she hallucinated a full Greek chorus, screaming "You're dying" on the flight home. How did a middle-aged ex-con talk a Protestant minister's teenager into that ride in the first place? Enter the Reverend Dean Morehouse, Ruth Ann's dad, a straight-laced clergyman who initially reacted exactly how you'd expect. Horror, threats of police, lots of "get away from my child." He even dragged Ruth Ann home more than once. Then Manson offered the good reverend a "let's talk about Jesus" tab of acid. And the next thing anyone knows, Dean is blissfully strumming a guitar at Dennis Wilson's Sunset Boulevard mansion, preaching that Charlie might actually be the second coming. Parenting choice 0, psychedelics 1. Meanwhile, Ruth Ann's brief parental-approved marriage to a hometown boy, arranged mostly so she could legally cross state lines, with Charlie lasted about as long as a Beach Boys B-side. She was soon back in California, living commune style in Dennis Wilson's guest rooms, where the family ran up what the drummer later estimated was a cool $100,000 in food, doctor bills, and crashed cars. Not to mention the time Manson borrowed Wilson's Ferrari and swapped it for a dented pickup. By late '69, Ruth Ann was all in on Helter Skelter, cheerfully telling Susan Atkins she couldn't wait to get her own pick. Prosecutors, unsurprisingly, had questions. Indicted for witness intimidation over the psychedelic burger, she skipped bail, spent years on the lam, and ultimately lucked out when charges were dropped in '75 due to procedural fatigue. Today she lives quietly under another name in the Midwest. Proof that sometimes the craziest chapter of your life really can stay in the late '60s where it belongs. And Dean, last anyone checked, the acid wore off, but the convert stuck. He drifted through the '70s, still convinced Charlie had the cosmic answers. Follow that on the Father of the Year contestants history would rather forget. If you thought the acid-laced hamburger was peak chaos, just wait, because the Manson family's next brilliant idea involved airplane hijacking, machine guns, and a failed heist that would make a B-movie director ask for rewrites. So here's the scene. It's the early '70s. Charles Manson is on death row. Spoiler alert, he didn't get out. And the remaining family members are still out in the world, convinced that their little cult leader is the Messiah in a fringed vest. Enter the Hawthorne Caper, a plot so bonkers it makes the acid burger seem like a logical conversation later. The master plan? Break Manson out of prison. And no, not by digging a tunnel or baking a file into a cake. Oh no, they were going to rob a surplus store, steal a boatload of guns, hijack an airplane and fly Charlie out of the country. You know, casual Tuesday stuff. The brains behind this disaster was Kenneth Como, a full-blown Aryan Brotherhood member. Because what's a death cult without a dash of white supremacist spice? Manson apparently had reached out to the Brotherhood while in prison for protection, because nothing says spiritual leader like forming alliances with the prison gang. Manson even got Como transferred to Los Angeles County as a witness in the Hinman and Shia trials. Except Como had no interest in testifying. He just escaped custody and became the unofficial ringleader of the outside family, with Manson's approval, because of course he micromanaged even from death row. Como, Mary Brunner, and Catherine Scher, aka Gypsy, set this jailbreak fantasy into motion. Their target? A military surplus store in Hawthorne, California. Because when planning an international escape via hijacked airplane, naturally the first stop is a strip mall. Unfortunately for them, but very fortunately for literally everyone else, the store had a silent alarm. Before they could finish stuffing their duffel bags with semi-automatic weapons, the police showed up. And because subtlety was never the family's strong suit, they opened fire. Yes, in broad daylight, in a store with the cops. The shootout ended with Mary Brunner and the police officer both getting shot. Brunner survived but was arrested on the spot. So was Gypsy. Spoiler, they did not hijack an airplane. They didn't even make it to the parking lot. Manson, still in prison, presumably shook his head and mumbled something about bad vibes. Brunner was later sentenced to 20 years to life, while Scher got 10 years to life for her role. Como back to prison. No wings, no grand escape. Just a heaping dose of felony charges and another chapter in a never-ending saga of how not to run a cop. In hindsight, this might be the only jailbreak plan ever foiled by a silent alarm and a complete lack of basic logistics. Honestly, if this whole story had a subtitle, it would be Murder, LSD, and Poor Decision Making. The Manson Family Handbook. If you thought the Manson family story peaked with acid-laced hamburgers and failed shootouts in army surplus stores, well, buckle up again, because things are about to get darker, weirder, and much, much sadder. So most people have heard of Gary Hinman and definitely the Tate LaBianca murders. But what about James and Lauren Willett? Yeah, those are not as well known. Their tragic story rarely makes the headlines, but it's a chilling example of what happened when the remnants of the Manson family started eating themselves alive in the aftermath of Helter Skelter. So here's the deal. After Manson was safely tucked away behind bars, several of his followers kept the flame of delusion alive. Among them were Nancy Pittman, aka Brenda, Lynette Squeaky Fromme, yes, that squeaky future would-be presidential assassin, Priscilla Cooper, and two new additions to the circus, Michael Montfort and James Craig, who brought fresh criminal energy to the dying embers of the family. The strange little crew was holed up together in a California home, living communally, committing petty crimes, and somehow co-parenting Lauren and James Willett's baby daughter Heidi. Imagine your typical early 70s hippie crash pad, only with more illegal firearms and dead-eyed stares. Now, somehow along the way, details are still murky, but the vibes clearly went off the rails. James Willett wound up dead. His body was found in such a shallow grave that his hand was sticking up out of the ground. Subtle. Real stealthy, guys. Shortly afterward, police showed up at the home. Maybe someone tipped them off. Maybe the arm gave it away. Regardless, they found baby Heidi all alone inside the house. No parents, no babysitter, just a tiny little girl in the middle of a crime scene. And then came the kicker. Investigators checked the crawl space under the house and found Lauren Willett, also dead and buried in the dirt. Two young parents murdered and discarded like garbage, while their baby girl laid upstairs. Naturally, everyone started pointing fingers. Michael Montfort, who was dating Nancy Pittman at the time, took the fall and confessed to both murders. Nancy, ever the loyal accessory, pleaded guilty to helping after the fact. She got 5 years in prison, Montfort life. And as for Squeaky Fromme, somehow she walked away without a single charge, not even accessory. She must have had the luck of the devil, or one hell of a poker face. Either way, she sidestepped accountability again and continued her oddball path through American history, eventually attempting to assassinate President Gerald Ford with a pistol that wasn't even loaded. If there's moral to this chapter, besides don't join murder cults, it's this: the Manson's family didn't stop being dangerous when Charlie got locked up. They just got messier, sloppier, and somehow even more tragic. The Willets weren't famous, weren't rich, and weren't targets of some apocalyptic race war fantasy. They were just in their own place with their own people, and they paid for it with their lives. And Heidi, she survived. That's the one tiny shred of grace in this awful mess. Just when you thought the Manson's family couldn't get more culty, more bizarre, more color-coded, enter the Order of the Rainbow, a post-Helter-Skelter rebrand that sounds like a Lisa Frank fever dream, but was in fact Charles Manson's attempt at spiritual sequel dome. Imagine if Power Rangers were formed by a prison-bound doomsday prophet who hated corporations and really liked trees. By the mid-1970s, most of the family had either jumped ship, gone to prison, or disappeared into the fringes of society. But a few diehards, the loyalists, clung to Manson's ideology with white-knuckled devotion. These women were given new identities, symbolic earth names based on colors, and organized under the psychedelic-sounding Order of the Rainbow. Yes, really, because when you're a convicted cult leader, branding is everything. Lynette Squeaky Fromme became red, and she lived it. In 1975, she walked up to President Gerald Ford wearing a long, flowing red robe and pointed a pistol at him in the middle of a Sacramento park. Fortunately, or terrifyingly, depending on how you look at it, the gun didn't fire. She was arrested on the spot, gave a wild-eyed monologue about the environment and Manson, and became the most infamous rainbow by a long shot. Then there was Sandra Good, Crescent Blue, a longtime Manson cheerleader with a vengeance strike. She went full eco-terrorist and mailed out dozens of threatening letters to corporate executives she accused of polluting the planet. "You're killing the earth," she said, essentially, just with a lot more swearing and handwritten threats. She ended up in prison too, proving once again that federal mail charges are the easiest way to take down extremists. Nancy Pittman, aka Gold, stuck around long enough to earn her rainbow badge, but eventually switched cult leaders. She fell in with Michael Montfort, the guy who murdered James and Lauren Willett, married him in prison, and continued orbiting chaos like it was her personal son. Catherine Gillies, ever the loyal hanger-on, was dubbed Silver. She didn't grab headlines like the others, but she was there, living communally, following orders and serving as Manson's eyes and ears on the outside. Loyalty had its reward, even if they came in the form of shiny nicknames. And then there were the original girls: Susan Atkins, Violet, Patricia Krenwinkel, Yellow, and Leslie Van Houten, Green, each given a color during the early days of the Rainbow Order. It's worth noting that most of them eventually denounced Manson once they were separated in prison and had time and therapy to reflect. But Charlie, ever the puppet master, tried to keep his grip on their minds from behind bars, sending messages, passing spiritual nonsense, and assigning colors like it was some twisted version of Hogwarts. The color coding wasn't just aesthetic. Manson's new belief system, ATWA, which stood for Air, Trees, Water, Animals, was a half-baked eco-philosophy mixed with doomsday paranoia. Think Greenpeace if it was run by someone who talked to lizards and believed the Beatles were sending color-coded instructions. Fromme and Good became his environmental enforcers, trying to save the planet one federal offense at a time. In the end, the Order of the Rainbow was just another layer in Manson's increasingly delusional mythology. But it's a fascinating look at how far his followers were willing to go, not just to serve him, but to become something within his bizarre, color-coded, crumbling world. Honestly, if you made this into a TV show, people would call it too unrealistic. But this was real, and disturbingly was all very on brand. Just when you thought the Manson Girls casting call had finally closed, along came Elaine Burton, stage name star, who slid into Charles Manson's prison correspondence when she was a fresh-faced 17-year-old. Charlie, for the record, was 80 and looked every day of it. Picture a raspy fortune teller who'd been left under a heat lamp, raised in a devout Midwestern family. Star followed the classic Manson fan playbook, ditched small-town life the moment she could, moved to California, and dive headfirst into the cult's eco-gospel of ATWA. She ran his official website, wired him canteen money, mailed care packages, and spent visiting day weekends listening to cranky end-times philosophy mixed with gardening tips. Things got romantic, in a sense that marriage paperwork was filed in 2015. Prison gossip claimed they were weeks from a walk down the cell block aisle. Manson later told a journalist, "It was a rumor. No way I was getting hitched." Charlie never could resist contradicting himself. But here's the morbid kicker. Star's interest wasn't just spiritual. If the wedding went through, California law would have given her next of kin rights to Manson's corpse. Her reported plan was to seal him in a glass coffin and sell tickets, a kind of Coney Island meets true crime sideshow. Now, if you're looking for a clean ending, sorry, not here. The victims are still gone. The headlines have faded. Most of Manson's remaining diehards are either behind bars, off the grid, or slowly aging into obscurity. And that whole ATWA thing, let's be honest, it sounds more like an old username than a meaningful ideology. But what does stick with you after peeling back all this madness is this. Charisma can be deadly, and a little critical thinking goes a long way. The Manson saga isn't just a true crime story, it's a flashing red warning sign about what happens when someone hungry for meaning lets someone dangerous define it for them. So, final word, if someone offers you a color-coded nickname and starts talking about saving a planet by hijacking planes or preserving dead cult leaders in glass cases, maybe just walk away, or better yet, run. And thank you for watching. If you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here. And I'll see you there. Bye!